A wonderful good day. My name is Serge Lode. I'm one of the directors of Peace and Conflict Studies Institute Australia, and I welcome you to the presentation on the evaluation of the Bougainville Transition Dialogues work. I'd like to start with an acknowledgement of the traditional custodians of the land on which we are gathered. PaCSIA is based in Mianjin, and we're on Turrbal and Jagera lands. In Turrbal, the traditional greeting is Galang Nagarindu, and in Jagera, the traditional greeting is Gurumba Bigi. I acknowledge elders past and present. I acknowledge that their lands were never ceded. I acknowledge their law and their creation spirits. And I ask that the spirits of the ancestors look after us and watch over our work. And now it's my great pleasure to introduce my dear colleague, Dr. Catherine Levy. Catherine is our project evaluator and has conducted an external evaluation on the Bougainville Transition Dialogues and the work that preceded them. Catherine, could you please tell us a little bit about yourself and what you bring to this evaluation?
Yes, thank you. So originally I'm from Belgium, but I've lived in Papua New Guinea for over 25 years, and I'm still in a very close contact personally and on a professional level with the country. I worked on grassroots level as a linguist. I worked on local languages and also in awareness projects on HIV and AIDS, gender issues and women's empowerment. And I also worked in Bougainville twice on the Bougainville audience research in 2016 and 2018. My preferred methods of working is qualitative, which means we don't count yes and no's, but we gather the beliefs. We listen to what people say and listen to the words they use to talk about their perceptions, how they see things, how they understand things.
Wonderful. And that's what we're going to present to you in this video. And I say, let's hear the voices of the people of Bougainville. Over to you, Catherine. Thank you.
This is the presentation of the results for the PaCSIA Bougainville Dialogues. We did the field work in November and December 2022. So for the background of the research, the aims were to conduct a qualitative evaluation of the Bougainville Dialogues, and for that we were going to listen to facilitators and community members and to hear their perceptions, beliefs and attitudes on the transition dialogues, but also on the referendum dialogues, so previous to that. The method that we used were individual interviews and focus groups, gathering a few people together. We assured of confidentiality, we got oral consent. The work was done in Tok-Pisin, which was the language most accessible to most people in Bougainville, there where we were. All the questions were qualitative and open-ended, and the interviews were recorded for the purpose of analysis. So qualitative in this case, here it features, we're going to report what what the respondents say and what they believe, right? The sample, we interviewed a total of 97 persons. We worked per region, 48 in North, 22 in 7, 27 in the South. We spoke with 47 facilitators and 50 audience members, so community members, among which we had ward members, chief, group leaders, whether women's group, church or youth group. We had teachers and health staff. We interviewed 61 men and 36 women, and the youth were underrepresented in the audience that we met. And we worked in the 3 regions, both at urban and rural level. So this presentation is the main result. The complete results are in a report, in a full report, that's with PaCSIA. These are some of the main results. The presentation will have 5 parts. The first one, the perceptions of PaCSIA's work in Bougainville. So what is PaCSIA doing? The second, the perceived impact of their work. So what changes does PaCSIA bring? Then messages to ABG. What would you as an audience like to tell ABG? And the 4 suggestions to improve PaCSIA's impact. And then we'll round up with some conclusions and recommendations. Some notes, preliminary notes. All the work was done in Tok-Pisin, occasionally mixed with English words or parts of sentences. In the report, all the quotes were translated into English. And there's a number of words and expression pidgin that are quoted repeatedly in the analysis. For instance, Staplo to dark, to be in the dark, good place sit down, community well-being, custom, traditions, Bougainville traditions, big pla hunger lo saves, hunger for information, government, then the audience refers to the ABG, Autonomous Bougainville Government, and Walkabout Blo Bougainville, Bougainville's journey to independence through the transition. So the first part is the perceptions of PaCSIA's work in Bougainville. So when we ask people, what does PaCSIA do? They say, well, PaCSIA brings us information. It brings us information which is credible. PaCSIA comes across as a go-between between ABG and the communities. They bring us information in dialogue form. Yeah, they bring information to the population, but then they also take back questions and concerns to ABG. So there's we hear a very strong appreciation of the audience receiving information and the facilitators passing on information. This is all happening in a context of perceived information scarcity. So we have to remember the fieldwork was done in November 22, and at that time, most of our respondents had the feeling that they were not hearing enough, right? So they did feel like also no satisfactory flow of information between ABG and the population. And there's also doubled with a sense of urgency. People have in mind this timeline to independence. What does PaCSIA work? Then we have the historical presence of PaCSIA in Bougainville. PaCSIA was there for the referendum, and now they're there for the transition dialogue. They've been around for a while. It's also mentioned that they were there in COVID times and passing on information about dealing with the pandemic. On another level, what does PaCSIA do? PaCSIA quieten the hunger for information. Yeah, hungry lo save. So which is something that is unanimously perceived amongst our respondents, with expectations, impatience, and some exasperation of not hearing more about the transition process. So there's a silence from ABG that's repeatedly mentioned. It worries the part of the population. People say we're left in the dark, and describe themselves as tahangu, we are unfortunate, helpless. The next work PaCSIA is doing, PaCSIA comes down to village level. They come down to village level, and they come at different levels. They come and visit in person, and sometimes they have to walk to get there. So they come basically where nobody else is coming, and certainly where government presence is not felt. They come and they speak to us in our language. They speak in Tok-Place or local language, or in Pidgin. And this is very important to make sure things are understood. So it means that the information coming from ABG is broken down in understandable components. And these keywords, the keywords that were the 3 pillars and weapon disposal at the time of the referendum, and the keywords that we have now, this transition, the independence ready, all these keywords are broken down and made understandable to the population. So this indicates from PaCSIA a genuine will to communicate and to meet the population at their level. How do they do that? They use dialogue methods and also other innovative methods. The walkabout in this video is the prime example of that. The dialogue method is very well perceived and very important for the audience. It involves listening and talking. So it's very different to the usual one-way awareness where people are spoken to. The use of question, PaCSIA uses questions, and that educates the audience, and it opens their mind, and it gets the community thinking and talking about reconciliation, about development through peace. Audiences also, these tools that PaCSIA is using, they keep on being using within the community to promote reflection. So, for instance, the word dialogue becomes part of community languages. And this way of PaCSIA to work is also reminiscent of traditional community conversation methods. Yeah, and we're talking now about pre-crisis, and we'll get back more to that. The walkabout scenes videos, yeah, part of these innovative methods that PaCSIA use. So these videos are very, very highly regarded and appreciated. They give inspiration about things doable that are within reach of communities to do, and they're already being done. So it shows that it's working. Some of the videos also share national information, like the President's speech in Parliament, which was a very well-received piece of information. The videos are shared across the regions, so they bring a sense of the greater Bougainville. You see what's happening in other areas, and the sharing of the videos very much exemplifies the sharing of resources towards a common goal. So it has a unifying effect. We all listen to the same thing. So that's for the methods. Okay, what does this PaCSIA do? How do they work? They repeat their visits, and this is very important in the perception of the respondents. They come, but also they come back. And these repeated visits are very important for efficient information, right? It's needed for the audience education and for the part of the audience that is labeled as illiterates. Illiterates are the people who have no access to information. Maybe they are illiterate in terms of literacy, or they don't speak a language other than their language, so they don't speak Pidgin. But they keep popping up as part of the audience that needs to hear about PaCSIA's work. Yeah. This repeated visit by PaCSIA is something unique in the Bougainville information landscape, and it makes them trustworthy and dependable. It feels like they want to get their message across. So again, we have this perception of genuine commitment and trustworthiness. The next PaCSIA does, they work inclusive and neutral. For PaCSIA, all community members are welcomed as equal participants, and the women particularly, and the youth and people with disabilities see that as a very important opportunity to be part of the community. It is perceived, it's said several times, that women seem to take the opportunities to participate more readily than men, that they are more interested. And the youth also express their satisfaction as being made welcome. And we'll talk more about the youth a bit later. The videos, as said earlier, from all regions to all regions, and it's an evidence, proof of this inclusiveness and neutrality. Everybody hears the same thing. PaCSIA move freely. They move and they touch all the three regions, so they're neutral, and this really counteracts some of the lingering effect of the crisis that was not neutral and that was not inclusive. Yes, so PaCSIA's work is perceived to be counteracting this. And by doing that, PaCSIA enhances the normality of Bougainville as one united territory. The last thing then in PaCSIA's work, they train their facilitators well with transferable skills. Audience comment consistently that the facilitators' performance in village show that they are well trained and they're consistently well organized, well equipped, and they function in efficient teams. And what's very important is that the facilitators' skills are put to use in the communities for other purposes, other programs, and they become community assets. And we have seen that quite a few facilitators are also active at other levels, for instance, in the programs Healthy Villages, or as human rights defenders. So second part of the presentation, we're going to talk about the perceived impact of PaCSIA's work. Yeah, so after what you have seen of their work, what changes have PaCSIA's visit brought to the community? Again, we ask people, in your opinion, in your perception. A note maybe is that facilitators seem to tend to perceive more big change, big placenis, where the audience prefers to talk about some placenis, some change. Yeah, so we'll have to see what we can do about these perceptions a bit later in the presentation. What are the different parts of the PaCSIA's impact? Well, PaCSIA, they inform the population, and the word schooling, to educate, comes repeatedly. right? And schooling, getting education is a big aspiration across the Bougainville population. So by giving this education, they shape a smarter audience, which empowers them for the transition, but also an audience that is more aware and critical and demanding. So talk about Rausim to dark, which is to dissipate the darkness of ignorance, Opimai, opening the population's eyes, Kirapim Ting, waking up. And the idea is almost people waking up from a slumber that was cast by the crisis and the aftermath, right? So in this, the change comes from information and reflection, and it raises individual and community reflection, and from their self-confidence, it also energizes creativity and action. Another impact, PaCSIA works on peace building, which is crucial in the Bougainville historical context. Yeah, maintaining peace is a major concern, especially for women and youth. And the phrase "good place sit down," harmonious community living, is a central concept throughout the sample. So this good place sit down will shape the development options. For instance, when there's discussion about reopening of the Panguna mine. Third, what does impact of PaCSIA is to help understand ABG's work. So PaCSIA brings ABG's message. Yeah, that we have seen at that time there was the perception, not enough communication and a slow process to independent, and receiving communication about ABG through PaCSIA dissipates some of that frustration. We understand better. The next one is that PaCSIA activates a human right of the freedom of expression, and that comes specifically from the part of the population that has been exposed to awareness about human rights and community rights. A very important one, get the community back to talking. So that's a very important aspect that comes back. Respondents expressed the fact that there was this lingering effect of the crisis. It was difficult to speak up, difficult to speak together, lots of fear, lots of mistrust. And the dialogue physically reinstated the custom of communal conversation. And they say, they use expressions like "come out in passing blow mouse pass," extirpate the habit of muteness, ting true, opening the mind. For all people across the sample, the dialogues help normalize community life and interactions, contribute to wholesome community interactions, and help Bougainville to function better as a country. Another impact is to clarify independence readiness as a pathway to action. Yeah, that's keywords. Independence readiness, what is it? And through PaCSIA's promoted discussions, community reflect on income generation, which is a requisite for economic independence, right? So it's a credible path of nation building from the ground up, going from individual communities and then going up. And we hear that action, participation in this independence readiness is perceived as almost as a civic duty for nation building. It is our duty to be independence ready, and it's our duty to work for that. So it's a very important component. The community talks about SME, income generation activity. They can piggyback on local MP's initiative to start a balsa plantation, rice plantation, cacao rehabilitation. For the women, market buildings, the permanent market buildings were a very important tool. And then there's more difficult subjects like logging and mining. There's a general agreement then that the change starts at home. And there is multiple examples given of community cohesion, for instance, sports, music, community meeting halls, and also road building. The next thing that PaCSIA does, an impact that is obvious, is it supports various community groups. It supports the leaders, it supports the women and the youth particularly. So what the leaders say? The leaders say that PaCSIA's messages bring such positive messages that it validates the leaders' position. They are recognized as strong leaders through the fact that there is some communication coming from the government, or perceived as. right? They also really appreciate as leaders the normalizing effect of these all-inclusive community conversations, and they feel empowered. Women feel included, empowered, valued. They have rights, they can speak up, and PaCSIA's messages emphasize gender equality, but also the positive man's role inside the family. So it is a win-win. The whole family functions then within the community gets stronger. The women have their everyday life. They feel that PaCSIA is enhancing their everyday activities. They can blossom through it. Men seem to be more talking about larger income generating activities like cocoa or basil plantation, where they do depend on, for instance, the MP's support, where women are more in the short term, an extension of their present work, garden production, baking, sewing, and crafts. The next, the youth. The youth, we hear a lot about the youth, and our sample was not reflective. The youth is a more complex issue that needs to be investigated more, but everybody talks about the youth. And they are concerned for everybody, for the leaders who feel challenged, for the parents who worry, for the youth themselves who feel misunderstood. And yet they are the future of Bougainville. They have a key role. So the youth say about themselves, we feel gaps in our education, in our participation, in our vision. And we also feel stuck. We don't know how to move forward. What we would like is we want to break out of the mold, we want to participate, and by participating, we want to gain recognition and acceptance. And we feel that PaCSIA is doing that, say the youth. They help us identify pathways, they include us in the conversation. So overall, there is more focus required for the youth. And another thing on impact, and this time at the facilitator levels, what we have seen is that the facilitators are inspired through their work by PaCSIA to change or bring change at personal level. So they don't just talk, they walk the talk. They walk the talk, they love their work with the communities, they see the impact, but also they use their skills to be better community members, to be active at community level on other levels. But also they become better family members, and also they start their own income generating ventures. So what we get, the overview of PaCSIA's impact, we have a balance between a healing impact and a feeling of dependency. The healing impact, as we have seen, is the fact that PaCSIA's work normalizes, get into gear what is perceived as a normal, well-functioning community life and community activity throughout Bougainville, to be part of the referendum and the transition effort. But in parallel, because at the time when we were speaking with our sample, PaCSIA appears to be the only visible face of ABG at village level, the audience looks for guidance, and there is this idea of some dependency on PaCSIA because there is nobody else to turn to. All right, we come now to the third part of our presentation, and that is the message to ABG. We asked our respondents, what would you like to say to ABG? What would you like to pass on, a message you'd like to pass on to ABG? And our respondents, first foremost, said, we would like ABG to talk to us and to listen to us. We want to feel their presence. We want to feel that we are together on this journey to transition. And we would like to feel that ABG is listening to us and working with us. So these requests are across all our sample with pressure on the local MPs. Come to see us, come to see us. And there's numerous questions. What's the exact meaning of the keywords, for instance, or how do we transform the keywords into action? And then the overall basic question, will we get independence? Next to talk to us, the messages to ABG is, ABG, you gave us benchmarks, which are great. They can shape our community activities, but these benchmarks are also for our leaders, and particularly the one of good governance. Right? So good governance particularly applies to the leaders' performance, and there are expectation and demands of professionalism and ethics from public servants. The word corruption comes back repeatedly. So it can refer to corruption practice or perceived corruption practices at government level. So, for instance, that wantoks would be appointed over qualified candidates. But also corruption is used to describe this suspicious secrecy around government actions or inaction. So people say, if we don't hear anything, if there's no communication, does it mean there's no action? Does it mean that there is actions, but they would not bear scrutiny, that we shouldn't know about them? Right? And the dialogue, as we said, they open our eyes, they develop critical thinking. So there is a demand of accountability here. The third message to ABG. ABG, do your part in the transition effort, right? It's a common effort. Independence readiness is for all. We follow the benchmarks, but we need practical measures. And people say, maski tok tok tasol, not just empty word, do things. There are some initiatives from local MPs, cacao rehabilitation, balsa plantation, rice, the market buildings. So generally, ABG's part in transition effort would be to support income generating initiatives, like give seed money to start ventures. For cacao and vanilla that are already being grown, find us international markets, help us sell our production, give us good roads for transport, give us training skills. Train us for skills, give us good skills. The youth are very vocal here. They want to be active and they want education and training opportunities to participate. Another thing that's important is this part, ABG's part, their support is required, perceived as required more towards agriculture and fisheries. And one woman said, Bougainville has many mines. We don't have just one mine, the Panguna mine. We have many mines. We have a huge assets, gold in our soil for agriculture. We have gold in our seas for fisheries. Let's use those mines. The next message to ABG. ABG, please meet Bougainville's needs for education. So that's a concern across the population, education for income generation, for economic independence, but also for critical thinking and informed choices and enlightened leadership. Yeah, so more education across from elementary to high school through tertiary with well-trained teachers. And all that goes towards shaping human resources in Bougainville, which is really an overall concern. Respondents are unanimous. They look education in the future of Bougainville. Education will be enlightened leaders, well-trained population, and shared prosperity. By contrast, no education, it's a very bleak picture. Helplessness, hopelessness, and lawlessness. The next message to ABG. Here are concerns about access to ground. So this comes up regularly, a general concern that the increase in population gives more difficult access to ground to support a livelihood. And with this comes more land disputes and the violence links to sorcery accusations. So there is a demand there for ABG to listen to that concern. A suggestion to ABG, the next one, ABG, you could legalize a homebrew. So homebrew has casts a shadow over community activity and the good plus sin down, right? It's a statement of community failure. It talks about inaction, idleness, a waste of time and resources in a time of urgent action, and it creates fractures in the community. So there is suggestion to legalize homebrew, bring this illegal action in the light, and on the way, provide government income in the form of taxes. And another thing, then maybe that caps over these other messages, ABG, please acknowledge PaCSIA as a go-between. because PaCSIA has come to us as a community and they've listened to our request and they bring it back to you, our requests and testimonies. So PaCSIA is seen to acquire a bit this unofficial status as a go-between. We come now to the fourth part of our evaluation, where we ask people, what would you suggest to improve PaCSIA's impact? How can we make it better? Spontaneously, the first thing that comes from overall, from the total sample is, please, PaCSIA, continue your good work. Just continue what you're doing. And they mention again their belief in PaCSIA's impact, as we have heard before. Right? And immediately after saying continue, they say, okay, but please do more. And what more can we do? Well, come more than once, or come regularly, maybe up to 4 times a year, and then go to more communities, give them all the same message, show us more videos so that we all share what's happening, train more facilitators so they can go to more communities, come to places where people gather, come to schools, come to markets, come to church, and also use existing network to spread the information, right? Just have a bigger impact. Another thing suggested to PaCSIA, leave a trace behind. When you leave our community, we would be reminded of your teaching, and also it would support our local efforts in your absence. So possible traces could be skills that have been passed on, like mediation skills, human resources as local volunteers to continue work when facilitators leave, and maybe material reminders like printed leaflets. The next suggestion to PaCSIA is keep empowering the voiceless, right? And here we have very strong messages, particularly from women, from youth, from school dropouts. These groups particularly express their helplessness, the fact that they feel their voice is not heard. And PaCSIA helps legitimize their voice. It makes it stronger in full view of the community. The highest concern for this particular point is participation in decision-making on local issues and issues that have a long-term impact on community environment assets. So here it was logging and mining that came from these voices as the concerns that they wanted to be heard in. A next improvement on PaCSIA's impact, make sure the youth hear you. And that comes mostly from older respondents who values PaCSIA's impact on youth and say, we want to make sure that youth get the education from PaCSIA. And facilitators then could go to schools and speak to the grade 7 grade before they drop off. So they hear the message. Even when they get back to the community, they will have had the message, right? So all these practical ideas, these pathway for a meaningful contribution could be part of all that. In the vein of this preceding one, we hear help us with the youth, or help us, the youth, say the youth. So they're very vocal, the youth, they want to improve the present situation, they want to be part of a larger picture, and for that they need access to education, upskilling, training. They want to be better accepted, they want to be more integrated, to be more active. Yeah, so they have this feeling of helplessness, lack of resources, and again, they don't know who to turn to. The next one, facilitators, that is, please expand, please expand, do more, come more often. An important one, consider specific local needs. And that is targeted to allow more time or sufficient time in each community. The idea that we as a community, we can do with a bit more mentoring. Once we have heard and we start thinking about what changes we bring, activities we'd like to initiate. All right, how can you make the time to mentor us a bit more on that? They say support ward members and community to help them map their road, think it through, and discuss priorities. Within these local needs also, what we hear is consider each ward's specific need, and they're all different. You know, some are geographically different. They're mountains, hard to reach, or islands, hard to reach. The size of the population plays a part. The higher the population, the more communities you need to visit. And then they all have their local issues. Some have mining, some have logging, some have others. So the PaCSIA's impact could be improved if you look more at the custom-made rather than one-size-fits-all. And it is said the facilitators, they know about that. Enlarge the community audience. That's also a point that keep popping up, that we could have more people attend the community conversations. Sometimes there's a low attendance. Sometimes it can be made higher. Sometimes it feels like men or youth don't participate enough. And the result of a low attendance impairs the community impact. If not all voices are heard, not all people will participate. There's different interpretations for no-show, why people don't come, right? And some have to do with availability, some have to do with power dynamics. It is said some community members don't see the benefit of coming. Yeah, it's just another awareness. Men, it is said by some, men are not interested, they're lazy, they're not interested. The youth feel shy, or they feel labeled or segregated. And then women say sometimes we have too much work, can't spend the time, or we are not aware of visits of the times, or the time don't suit. So there is work to be done to increase community attendance. The initial suggestions we got would be to confer with facilitators and with the community, and then identify conditions of better attendance, like amongst other things could be the precise warning of time and visit, and evening sessions for greater availability. The leaders' support and endorsement, that's a very important one, leaders as community drivers. Repeated visits, longer time in the community, to build the common work, to build the groundwork, to measure the community progress. Something that comes up, to measure the importance and the success of community participation, is to identify performance indicator, things that show us that we are progressing. And we come to the fifth part of the presentation. So the conclusions, which repeat some of the arguments said before, and then some recommendations. We look at PaCSIA as a program, we look at facilitators' impact, and we look at the program evaluation. PaCSIA as a program, well, we have overall a very positive impact, right? So in the context of end transition and urgency, PaCSIA brings much needed information, fosters reflection, information is power, so people can make informed choices at the level of individual, community, and percolates to country level. Action is perceived as civic duty, and that's across the sample, and non-action is resented as a waste of time and resources. In this context, the dialogue helped address a common concern of Bougainville need for education, strengthen their human resource, which is a condition for successful transition, and clarify the practical path to needed action. The tools used by PaCSIA in the dialogues are these targeted questions that invite communities to reflection, and the Walkabout Senis video that share initiatives and inspiration. Our recommendation here would be to use the questions videos strategically. That's been asked. So identify questions and topics relevant to that particular community's context. Include questions to visualize the community's future and shape the choices, and then develop and share relevant videos. The perception of change from the dialogue. So both audience facilitators perceive change at individual and community level, perceive change. And the change is positive and it's strengthening. And vulnerable community members like women and youth get more strength, and that in turn strengthens the community. There is some, of course, subjective perception, right? Community maybe see smaller change, some PaCSIA, where the facilitators see big PaCSIA. And so here we might recommend to choose community indicators of change that would help the community keep track and maybe also foster accountability. Yeah, so for evidence, encouragement, accountability, to help trust progress, update them as required. So the indicators of change can be modified. Quantitative and qualitative. Yeah, we can count things. We can also qualify well-being. And it will be required to have a community consensus on indicators, like answers to the question, what changes will show our progress in 6 months' time. So there's work on community changes, indicators of change within the community. Perspectives from community subgroups, and they vary a lot. They vary according to the different groups. The women seem to know their path, and they're very grounded in everyday action and everyday results. And they feel like the dialogues uncover their potential for growth. They can do more and do better, and they're very eager. They express their eagerness to seize these opportunities to expand and diversify their activities. The men are maybe a bit more hesitant. They seem to need more guidance and support to define their work, right? So the dialogues, together with MP's initiative, help them shape projects that are actually bigger and longer term. We've spoken in terms of plantation, for instance, and these initiatives appear to need more support and also include financial support to start up. What adult men and women have in common, though, and that's important, it's a vision of the future, which is based on pre-crisis time. They remember the pre-crisis time, and they want to go back to something like that. Now, when we talk about the youth don't have a pre-crisis time. They were not there, or they were babies. So they express either a lack of vision or a lack of confidence in their vision. Yeah, maybe it's there, but they're not too sure it's doable. They certainly express the perception of gaps. They have gaps in their education, in the distance between their hopes and the reality, and sometimes in the language. Some feel they don't speak pidgin. Yeah. So the paradox is they are the future of Bougainville, and yet they're labeled the lost generation. And it doesn't compute. It can't go together. They do express that they feel victims of intergenerational prejudice and circumstance that stunt their growth. They feel labeled lost generation, and then what? What do you do next when you are labeled as a lost generation? So the positive from the dialogues for them is that the dialogues integrate them in the audience and the community. It reintroduces this concept of hope and vision, right? Things that are doable within their reach. And so the dialogues this way are perceived as an avenue for education and integration. So our recommendation here would be to focus on the subgroup specific needs, right? And identify inclusive community goals and indicators to serve them. On the topic of increasing community attendance, the dialogue's aims of information and decision-making require large audience participation to work practically on community level, right? Inclusive audience where every voice is represented and heard means homogeneous community progress. So attendance may be subject to the members' practical availability and also power dynamic within the community. So there's our recommendation here is to target increased community attendance to the dialogues for meaningful representations. This should be done really a work between facilitators with community leaders and members. Yeah, how can we achieve this together? And how do we coax more community members and then retain them? How do they come back? Facilitators and audience, a very powerful dynamic here. The facilitators have pride in their positive impact, which they recognize, and the audience sees the facilitators as community resources, and they express a form of dependency on their presence and input. And then that translates in the facilitators developing a feeling of responsibility, and they feel pressure to support the communities. They want to do more, they want to do better, and it's a very potent motivating factor for their performance. They have a very, very strong commitment and feeling of responsibility. So there is something like a checklist for facilitators' performance, right, to help us identify conditions for deeper local support and optimal contact. Examples that have been suggested, how much time do they spend in community, the fact that visits are repeated, the geographical coverage, some areas are very difficult to access, the adequate equipment, including the use of videos, focus on audience attendance, improving audience attendance, questions and videos that are relevant as topic of discussions for this particular community. And then are there other ones then to be identified? Facilitators and audience share a vision, this dynamic. There's a general request for information and support on a background of urgency. The dialogues presently touch only a fraction of the total population, but they are a valuable model to be expanded. And facilitators and audience share this vision of a Bougainville population that is better informed, is empowered to decide and act in unity, is benefiting from each other's energy and experience, and boost the transition effort. Program evaluation. We had a very good geographical coverage, all three regions, and every time we went rural and urban, and a good sample size with a good ratio of facilitators audience. It was qualitative inquiry, which is really an opportunity to collect personal views and opinions. And the sample size allowed us to gather a large range of opinion, views, and attitude. We had 97 people with whom we spent over an hour each. Our recommendation would be to work on balancing the sample in terms of sex and age groups. So more women and then more youth. And so we'd have to work on that. How do we get a more balanced sample? For instance, suggestion could be to spend more time in one location, include opportunity for evening interview sessions. And that's it. Thank you very much.